let's start with the importance of tackling the low-hanging fruit first when it comes to managing this perimenopause and menopausal time of life for us women.
Well, I think the word complicated that you mentioned a few times really says it all in a nutshell, is that it is complicated. And hormones, I say always essential, foundational, necessary, but not sufficient. If we look at young women, say in their 20s and 30s, who have fully functional ovaries, at least reasonably so, they're not old ovaries. They don't have old eggs like what happens to the perimenopausal women, and then of course no eggs left when you get into the full-blown postmenopausal years. But these young women often have a wide array of metabolic dysfunctions.
Mhm.
So even women who have, and we know that obesity rates in young women, metabolic dysfunctions, infertility, all these things are skyrocketing. And it's not because they have old ovaries, it's because of all these other outside influences that are impacting how their hormones are being produced and then how they're working in the body. So understanding the essential nature of hormones, but their lack of being, omniscient or, all serving, all powerful. They're just part of the piece of the puzzle. So I always like to say, if optimal health is like a jigsaw puzzle and you have 1,000 pieces, the 600 center pieces, okay, um, involve all of our natural hormones, the way the body works inherently, enzymes and peptides and all those things. But the surrounding 400, which is critical, because we always know when you want to put a jigsaw puzzle together, you start with the frame, you start with the straight edges, right? Because, and then you build from the outside in. Well, the outside in, those other 400 pieces are all the lifestyle components:
Mhm.
what you eat, how you live, how you move, how you sleep, and then targeted supplementation. So you're never going to put the puzzle together if all you have are the center pieces. You have to have those other outside. So to have the total state of health, to have all your pieces of your jigsaw puzzle put together, you need to incorporate more than just hormones. But hormones are essential because otherwise you're going to be having a giant gap in the center of your puzzle. So when you look at it that way, then you see everything as interconnected. So then you go through the whole litany of what can you do to help your hormones that you do have either being made naturally during the perimenopause still to optimize your health, and how can you create more long-lived ovaries, because we know there are some ways that you can get some extra mileage out of those ovaries. And then when there's no more ovarian function left and you're using exogenous outside hormones, you're getting hormone therapy, what can you do to optimize your body's use of those hormones,
Right.
metabolism, like you mentioned, because everything ultimately gets eliminated from the body. Like, you do not have the same hormones in your body when you're 30 that you had when you were 17. It doesn't work that way. You got to get rid of the old and in with the new. So you got to have good ways of doing the transformation, like you mentioned, in your liver through the gut, to transform these hormones into metabolic products that the body can then eliminate properly. So, yes, it's complex. Hormones are essential, foundational, but not all encompassing, that all you need is hormones. That's why I really despise, I hate to use that word, but I do. I despise hormone clinics that all they do is throw out hormones to people and they don't look at the total body's situation. They're not actually looking at anything beyond, well, you're of the age that you need some hormones and here's your hormones. Have a nice day. That's not good health care. So, that's why, it's just so important to understand hormones and the role they play, but they're not the be all end all. They're just part of the way to achieve optimal health.
So what comes first? The chicken or the egg? Is it that we are losing our hormones and then it's causing adrenal issues and thyroid issues and mood issues? Or Are we insulin resistant? Our thyroid's going down just as we age, and our adrenals are going down, and then our hormones suffer. Because the thyroid's the master endocrine gland, it affects the gonads, it affects the adrenals. So that's where I wonder, like, if you address the thyroid, the adrenals, the liver, then maybe you need less of the hormonal therapy versus you do the hormonal therapy first and then address the other issues.
Well, there is actually no playbook on this. There is no program. There's actually limited data. But the way that I look at it, I see the interconnection. So I see it in most cases, but I'll give you the exception in a second, as sort of a package deal. Like if you look at, we'll go like some of these different endocrine systems that are all, of course, interconnected. The thyroid gland, for example, has receptors to estrogen. So without adequate estrogen, the thyroid gland literally will not work properly. So it's like a wild thing that people don't realize, all these interconnections. So, and then if you look at like the adrenal, well, the autonomic nervous system, that's what is controlling all the functions of the body we don't think about, which includes things like your motility of your gut, how your gallbladder contracts, your pancreas putting out digestive enzymes, making saliva, tearing, your temperature, your pulse, when how your bladder fills and empties. I mean, you can go through the whole everything, that is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. And the signals, like through what is called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the nerve, which is like a big finger of the brain that comes down. It's also known as the 12th cranial nerve, controls the parasympathetic, which is the part of the autonomic nervous system that should be dominant, except if you're injured or if you're being invaded by pathogens like bacteria or viruses. You should be in a state of essentially calm, good digestion. Sometimes they call it rest and digest. You can sleep properly, you digest properly. Well, it turns out that the vagus nerves, the neurotransmitter, because it's part of the neurological system, is acetylcholine, which is actually modulated in its production and function by estrogen.
Mm.
And the other part of the autonomic nervous system, which is called sympathetic, but sympathetic doesn't mean like I'm empathetic. No, it's sympathetic, S like stress.
Yeah.
Okay. And part of the stress response is adrenergic as in adrenal. And when you have a stress response, you put out different types of neurotransmitters, epinephrine, norepinephrine, that makes your heart beat faster and you get like sort of sweaty. That's from those neurotransmitters. But you then have more of the adrenergic, so it triggers the adrenal gland to make more cortisol. And then you have too much cortisol coming out, and too much cortisol if you have chronic stress, because the stress response is supposed to be acute, like when you need it, like you were just lacerated, you were injured, you were attacked by pathogens and so on. But if you're chronically stressed, as is so common in our society these days, you put out initially too much cortisol. Too much cortisol will change your state of inflammation. You'll get leaky gut. So then you'll have leaky gut. You're going to have dysbiosis. You'll have inflammation. You'll have the endotoxins coming from the gut into the body, and systemic inflammation, which increases insulin resistance. So then you become like pre-diabetic. And then when you make too much cortisol, along for the ride comes too much DHEAS, which is the androgen. That's why women, when they're stressed, they get pimples because they get too much of this androgen. So you can see how it's all connected. And then when you have all that problem with your too much cortisol, it messes with your circadian rhythm. And then you have appetite dysregulation. You can't sleep properly. And then you get more metabolic dysfunction. And then you have more inflammation. And if you have functioning ovaries, you have more inflammation in your ovaries, which downregulates the production of progesterone. And then you get irregular cycles and infertility and problems. So, that's so you can see it really is like a circle. You
Yeah.
can enter this circle with stress, with estrogen deficiency, and with thyroid problems. So it's complex. I keep coming back to that word. So in younger women, I try to address everything at the same time to people's tolerance. Like if they're younger, I don't give them hormones right out the gate typically. I would work with like exactly what you said. I would work to try to help their ovaries to work better by if they actually are in a state of thyroid deficiency, like they have Hashimoto's and they have low thyroid, I would give them thyroid supplementation. But if that's not the case and they're just sort of like maybe not converting optimally T4 to T3, which can be a sign of chronic stress. It can also be a sign of deficiencies of micronutrients like selenium. So, it's like I like to do micronutrient testing and then support as much as I can targeted like what people are deficient in. Like, for example, to make thyroid hormone, you need a whole array of micronutrients. You cannot make thyroid properly if you don't have enough iodine and iron and zinc and selenium and copper. And I mean, you have to have these micronutrients. And then if you don't have enough estradiol, then the thyroid gland just doesn't work as well. If you have too much cortisol, then you're not going to have proper conversion because you'll make too much reverse T3. So it's, oh my gosh, it can seem overwhelming, but the way that you approach it is if you're a younger woman who still has ovarian function, and that can include perimenopausal women, you can work to then try to optimize their ovarian function through getting them on a very anti-inflammatory diet, giving some antioxidants. We know that certain supplements can help the ovaries to work longer, like urolithin A, like DHEA, interestingly, magnesium, melatonin. These actually, there are tremendous amounts of receptors for melatonin on the ovaries. The ovaries need to be in a body that has proper circadian rhythm. That's why sleep is so important, and having bright light in the day and darkness at night is so important. So you get the right rhythms and production of melatonin. But adding some supplemental melatonin has also been shown to help extend the lifespan of ovaries.
Yeah.
So in younger women, who obviously have some hormones and hopefully have the capability of having ovarian function longer, I would work with all the ancillary things first, work on gut health and stress and sleep and avoidance of like the ubiquitous toxicants and endocrine disruptors, the xenoestrogens and so on, work to improve their body's detoxification pathways so that they can hopefully eliminate some of these toxicants. And in women who are postmenopausal, but not too old, like we'll say that they're within 10 years of menopause, I'll start them on some hormones at the same time as I'm doing all of this. In much older women, like say they're already well into their 60s or 70s, I'm not going to start them right out the gate on the hormones
Mm.
because there is a chance that they'll use the estradiol to push down certain enzymatic pathways that can lead to the wrong production of end products. And so I want to first work to reduce systemic. Of course, I do a lot of monitoring and measuring. I get a lot of labs. I check vascular health, heart health. So I get ultrasounds of these different structures and so on. And then I will try to do what I can with working with natural approaches to improve gut health, lower inflammation, improve the state of nitric oxide production through supplementation and such. And then I'll slowly, starting low, add in the hormones, but not until I have shown through testing that inflammation is coming down, the gut is improving. And to that end, I do use a lot of phytoestrogen foods. I call them nature's gift to women because they have these molecules in them called phytoestrogens, and there's a whole array of them throughout the plant world. So it's not just vegetables, it's nuts and seeds and grains, all these things, all the legumes, they have different varieties of phytoestrogens, which can bind weakly to our own estrogen receptors and in a very safe and beneficial way to create a way of restoring mitochondrial health, gut health, liver health. So I never leave out the vital phytonutrients, which includes these phytoestrogens, because they can be miraculous. And then in terms of gut health, I always want to include probiotic foods along with some probiotic supplementation and lots of fiber foods. These are wonderful to help feed and nourish our gut microbes. So it's definitely individualized based on my testing. But in younger women, I would not jump into hormones, but I definitely would in the women who are in the early stages, along with all the lifestyle. But in the later stages of menopause, I would not jump right into hormones.